Welcome to Solutions OP Clinical Trials Podcast. My name is Olga and I'm the Managing Director of Solutions OP. We are a small team of experienced professionals working on clinical trials in the United Kingdom. I'll use our podcast to discuss hot topics in clinical trials and provide analysis of the latest trends and challenges in pharma and medical device industries, not just in the UK but globally. Thank you for listening. Welcome to the latest episode of the podcast. Today I have the great pleasure to speak to Richard Vincins, who is a regulatory affairs and quality assurance consultant with a very extensive experience in the USA and Europe. He has degrees in chemical engineering and also biomedical science. And those of you who are members of the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society will know him very well from the Regulatory Exchange Forum, where Richard is providing advice to colleagues working in medical device companies. So he's always extremely helpful and one of the leading experts in the field. So I'm very pleased that he agreed to speak to me today. As you maybe have guessed already, we are going to talk about medical devices and more specifically about the challenges that small and mid-sized companies face when obtaining CE marking in Europe. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the process, because I know some people work in drug studies, and I just want to clarify. So if you want to have a medical device placed on the market in Europe, you need to have a CE marking, and this is something basically all companies have to obtain that before they go onto the market. In order to do it, they need to have sufficient clinical data and also technical documentation to support the registration. And there are independent companies called notified bodies, which are responsible for assessing the data and authorizing the medical device. So that's part of the regulatory framework in Europe. So thank you, Richard, for joining me today. And I'll ask you first to tell me a bit about your business and the services and what regions you cover, and just tell me whatever you think will be interesting.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Olga, for inviting me to this. I've never done a podcast before. I can't say that I've actually seen very many in real life either. My life is a bit busy, I think, for it. But yeah, thank you for the opportunity. It's nice to chat with you. We seem to talk just on the forums and quite aligned on many of our responses. But I'm part of MD Compliance. We are a quality assurance and regulatory affairs consulting company based in Scotland, though we primarily focus on the UK and Europe. However, as you can tell from my accent, I'm originally American, so I lived in the UK for over 15 years, and our company primarily focuses on quality system and regulatory affairs activities. We don't get so much into testing or clinical trials or things of that nature, but in quality systems, we conduct audits for companies, internal audits, preparation audits for inspections. So having the US experience and the EU experience, quite well that we provide like pre-inspection preparedness and notified body preparedness audits. We also help companies set up their quality systems. So a lot of smaller companies will come to us and we use a nice UK pragmatic approach to setting up quality systems for companies. And then we also work on regulatory affairs. So again, being US experience, working on 510Ks. I don't know how many Q submissions we've done over the years, but it's a great opportunity for companies to get have conversations with the FDA. So I'm a very huge proponent of Q subs, and I try to do those as much as I can because it's nice to see what needs to be done rather than trying to think about it on the top of the air. And then working on technical documentation in the European Union. It's certainly been a challenge in the last 10 years or so with the new regulation. We started working with companies back in CE marking during the MDD in the late 90s, and it's shocking or amazing to see how it's changed over the last 20 30 years. So, but we support companies in their technical documentation as well, getting CE marking. So that's a little bit about what we do. We've tried to stay a bit generalized in providing services that companies want. And we work with lots of different companies and lots of different products. We have quite a vast experience of different product types.
That's very interesting, and it's brilliant that someone helps, especially with the quality management systems. I think many, particularly small companies, they always struggle with that. It's so that's really brilliant thing that you're doing that work, Richard. So I'll get to my next big question I wanted to ask you is about the unique challenges that you think small companies face when they're trying to obtain their CE marking. What are your thoughts on this one, about their problems?
Yeah, I think it's we've worked with very large companies, the multi-billion-dollar companies on specific projects and doing specific audits, but we primarily work. I would say most of our work is with small companies of even 10 people or less. And I think the challenges that they have is of course resources. If companies had in their budgets to have a well-seasoned QA/RA professional, that'd be awesome, brilliant. But then of course I wouldn't, and other people wouldn't have jobs as consultants if that was the case. So I think the small companies, need to find the right person to help them. Some consulting companies focus on certain activities or certain products. So sometimes it is a challenge trying to find the right fit. And then from a regulatory standpoint and quality standpoint, they are medical devices. They're regulated. There's certain requirements that have to be met. But when I look at how small companies dealt with things 20 years ago as it is today, there's just so much work that has to be done between the regulations, the standards, meeting guidance documents. They say are guidance, but we all know the expectations that companies follow them. There's just a struggle having enough resources and enough experience. Plus, regulations are always changing, and I think specifically in the European Union, CE marking, that maybe isn't so transparent, and I think it hasn't been so consistent. So that if you are working with one notified body versus another notified body, or you're even speaking with a health authority in one country, they may not have the same view as another country. So I think the inconsistencies within the European Union have always been a struggle. It was that way for quite some time when you compare to, say, other countries, like Japan, Korea, or United States that have a singular regulatory authority. When you're dealing with different groups with different opinions and different views and even different healthcare systems, we've seen small manufacturers that have wanted to go into the market in, say, Spain or Italy, and then when they try to go into places like Germany, they're quite shocked because the expectations are different. So I think between the amount of work that has to be done from a quality regulatory perspective, and some of the inconsistencies in Europe, we really try to help small manufacturers, meet what they need to do.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for it. It's very interesting. I think also in terms of consultants, maybe there are people who are more used to work with bigger companies. Like there's some consultants who have experience in the bigger companies, and there are consultants who work with smaller companies. And I think, and I've always been a great supporter of this idea that people should find the consultant which has the experience in their area. So if you're a small company, you really need to find someone who has experience with small companies rather than hiring someone who's worked for some big company and has completely different mindset, if you want to put it that way. So thank you so much to confirm that in a way that it really is important. So when we're talking about European Union, I know it's always complicated. There are plenty of inconsistencies, but What do you think are the biggest obstacles for innovation that companies face in the European market?
I think beyond just probably generally funding, companies getting the funding, because everybody wants, these investment companies want to see something out there making money. And it's always difficult to invest in some of the unknown, even though I've talked with lots of small companies or even individuals that have these nice innovative products, and they're very passionate about it, and their belief in helping people is tremendous, and it's always great, and I always want to be able to help these companies get through the regulatory pathways. But then, as we know, it takes money to do clinical studies. It takes money to put in quality systems. It takes, fees to get submissions done. And so getting the funding is one challenge. But I think that from a quality regulatory perspective, and especially in the European Union, it's understanding and planning early. We see too often the smaller, these innovative companies that come up with this product that is tried and true, that actually does work, but they've sort of gone all the way through the design process already, and they haven't put all the design steps in place, and so it's always challenging for us to try to move those companies back through their design process, and even back to the beginning, defining a requirements document or something of that nature. Or even worse, talking to them about having to do, some additional non-clinical testing. Maybe there was some biocompatibility tests that they did, but they didn't do the right ones according to the standard. And even worse, sometimes having to go to them and say, well, we're probably going to have to look at doing a clinical study, and looking at £1 million or €1 million study puts a lot of companies off. So I think, in our experience, being able to work with small companies and innovative companies at the very beginning, I wish there was more of a forum for that type of thing to get people started earlier than waiting, because we often see that it's so much more difficult to try to put things in rather than doing it from the beginning.
Talking about this, I saw that there is a program, it's like a pilot program in the UK, helping medical device companies with their design and everything. But I think it's more focused on the UK and getting to the UK healthcare system rather than generally helping them having their products. Do you have any experience, or have you heard anything about this one? I don't know if you...
No, we have. And in fact, in the UK, there's actually small hubs of the innovative network. I was working with a group up in the northeast in Yorkshire, and they have an innovative hub there. And I think you're right. It's maybe not focused primarily on medical devices, but it doesn't really talk to them about the regulatory. It's more about how they get funding, how they can talk to investors, and things like that. And so I have spoken in front of some of those groups. And there are other countries that have something similar. I know Sweden has something like that, and Germany has something like that. But again, I think those groups maybe need to reach out to the medical profession and get them more involved to talk about, well, here's the regulation, this is what you're going to have to, needing to do, rather than let's worry about getting some Class A funding or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's the main problem. And even when it comes to funding, I spoke to a guy who has a software as a medical device, and it's a startup company, and he was saying when we compete for funding, it's like in European Union, it's one funding for everything, so it doesn't matter if it's rocket science or something else, we all compete for the same funding. So I think even the way the funding is structured for startups and for medical device companies is not really well thought through. That's my feeling so far from what I've heard from people and feedback. So when companies are thinking about introducing to the USA or the European Union first, what are some of the thought processes that to go through? What do you think is the best approach?
We talked to quite a few small companies that are looking at the markets first and trying to determine what would be the best. And unfortunately, due to the regulation in the European Union, it's maybe not so attractive. Mostly, as I talked about before, that there's inconsistency. So the U.S. system is much more established and much more consistent because you have one regulatory agency. And we've talked to innovation companies, and we've talked to small manufacturers who are, wanting to see E-Mart, and they just get frustrated because they'll reach out to 2 or 3 different notified bodies, and they get different information, different fees. That's probably the biggest thing that is challenging. Whereas, if you go to the United States, there's a 510K or de novo, you know what the fees are, you know what the process is, how it's going to be reviewed. So I think a lot of companies nowadays are looking for that consistency, especially innovative companies, because the United States does have some programs such as the breakthrough designation, whereas in the European Union for under CE marking, they're talking about it. And certainly MHRA here in the UK wants to put a system and already has a pilot that they're doing for that. But in the European Union, if there was a sort of a breakthrough designation or a new technology innovation pathway, that I think that would attract a lot more companies back to Europe. Whereas, in the United States, when we talk to them and compare the two, they often decide, even though it may seem a bit more regulatory burden in the United States, there's just more consistency and known information that, especially when they're going back to their investors, they can give a higher confidence level of getting a product onto the market versus, looking here in the European Union.
Do you think there are more strict regulations in the US? Because at least when I look into the GMP, the good manufacturing practice, my impression is that the US is more relaxed and give you a little bit more space to think about things, right? The European Union regulation is really like they want to tell you what kind of filters you have to use to do the things. It's that kind of detailed. So do you think that's the case with the medical devices? Do you think the US has more requirements, or do you think European Union has more requirements? What's your overall feeling?
I actually think that between the United States and the European Union, the requirements and the regulations are actually quite similar and quite even. So I don't think one has more than the other. I think the difference is that in the United States, there is a bit more flexibility. But at the same time, I think companies in Europe and the UK are a bit more cautious about going to the United States because they don't know anything about the United States regulations. So it's sort of it's sort of like saying, well, yes, we have our product CE marked. Let's go to Brazil. Let's go to Japan, and it's just not easy because you don't know the regulations there, and oftentimes you have to have an in-country person helping. So I think that's the benefit that MD Compliance bring to some of our clients is that I do have that U.S. experience, so we can sort of talk them through the process, and then after. We talk to these small companies, they're like, oh, well, maybe that's not so bad. And I said, no, it's not really, because especially if you can have conversations with the FDA about what type of clinical study you're going to do, what type of testing that you're going to do. You can have those open conversations. So I think it's, as you said, it's a bit more flexible than in the European Union.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So what other countries do you think could be considered apart from the European Union for companies who want to go to the market? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think there's some great regulatory groups in some of the other markets, such as Japan and Korea. You do need to most likely have an in-country representation or have an in-country expert there that's walking through the process, because for one, you have to make the submission in the local language, but the processes are quite the same. I think it's that unknown factor that scares a lot of companies away. But countries like Korea and Japan, they're very good markets. Canada is also quite a good market. The challenge with Canada is that it's not a huge market, and so companies are looking at where they can make money. So the United States and the European Union are some of the first ones that come to mind. But when you go to some other countries like Mexico and Brazil and Japan and Korea, the regulatory process is actually not that much different. In fact, if you're CE marked, a lot of the technical information you need from the submission for those countries you already have. It's more, again, the dealing with the local translations or the local things that scare a lot of companies off.
It is scary. I had a manufacturer. They had a device manufactured in Turkey, and they had all the reports and everything in Turkish, and there were tons and tons of pages that they had to translate. When they heard that, they nearly died. It's because if it's something easy to translate, fine, but it's a technical documentation. It's really difficult. You need someone who has really expertise into the language to be able to translate this one, and particularly in the European Union, they want licensed translations. So I think the cost was it's something that put them off. Definitely, they're translating their documents to come to the European market.
Yeah, absolutely.
AI is a very popular topic at the moment. So what tools or items of AI do you think are beneficial for medical device companies at the moment? Do you have any experience, anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think there's a couple areas that probably are helping companies with using AI tools today. Certainly in the clinical evaluation process, that's very helpful. Because depending upon the type of device, you may have hundreds of literature articles that you have to go through. So I think using tools that have native language explanations, being able to take an 8-page article and boil it down to 2 or 3 paragraphs is very helpful. I think that I've seen some tools that are used for putting together submissions. I don't think they're quite at that point yet. We're taking 50 documents and combining all of these and putting these into a nice technical documentation file. I don't think it's quite there yet. But what I do see is, again, I see these tools being used to generate portions of the technical documentation. So again, having maybe 15 different non-clinical testing reports, and taking those and boiling them down into some nice summaries that can be then inserted into a submission. But I don't think the tools are quite at that point where it's completely automated as some people would like. But I think there are some people are using it more and more for submission content. Not the submission itself necessarily, but I see a lot of the tools that are being used out there to gather lots of information rather than I remember 20 years ago when I had to put together 510Ks, going through 80, 90 different documents and trying to figure out where to put it and what information to do. So I think there are some opportunities there, and probably only get better as time goes on.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I've also seen some companies using AI, but not always the right way. I've seen even reports and technical documents written with AI, and you just read it and you're thinking, did anyone read that? It's like, or you just request someone to put it through an AI tool, and then that's your report, hoping that the regulators will never ever look into it. So I've seen, it's really bizarre, but I've seen cases like that where people have used AI too, and they haven't even looked into it by the look of it. So I hope that will improve in the future. And as you said, it's a lot of documents. If we can use it somehow and have some summaries, that's great. I think people are a bit reluctant also because of confidentiality. And that's another thing, especially I know for drug companies, that's a big part, they're not really willing to provide any information that is confidential and patent protected and so on. So that's part of the challenge with adopting AI, at least to me so far, if you agree. And I'll ask you the very last question, which is, what's on your wish list? What you would recommend for the European regulators to change? If there's something that you want them to change, what you would prefer for them to do, and I don't know, make our life a bit easier, maybe.
Yeah. I have a huge wish list, and I'd love to have conversations with people in Brussels about things that could be improved. I would say that some of my probably the two things I would like to mainly see is one is more consistency. So I think the MDCG group is doing a good job. They've released a lot of guidance documents. I was a bit skeptical in 2018 or so, and I was like, okay, what's happening? And then they came out with one, and they're still updating and so forth. I think they just need to keep doing that, and I think they need to sort of close some of those sort of unknown areas, and they've done that. But just like most people, they need resources, they need time. But I think providing guidance in some of those areas that people always have questions about is very helpful. Things like when they released the MDCG for authorized representative roles, when they released some of the guidance on legacy devices, I think those were well received. The other area that I would probably like to see improved or put on my wish list is just being able to stratify, I would say. I'm trying to think of the right word, but have the regulations actually as they're intended, that if you're a Class 1 manufacturer, there's certain risks that are associated with Class 1 devices. And if you're a Class 3 manufacturer, there's certain risks that are associated with Class 3. I sort of see in the European Union that it's sort of all still one class. Yes, you only have to do certain reports for certain devices every other year or every year. Or yes, the GSPR is only applicable for these certain types of things. But what I don't see is the regulators viewing the risk levels of devices. So we have quite a challenge when we're working with Class 1 and lower risk Class A devices, that the regulatory expectations are still very, very high for that type of device. So yeah, I think my wish list would be, living in the UK for a while, I've gotten a very pragmatic point of view, which is how we do things in the UK. and it would be great to have just a more pragmatic view on risks of devices, and actually the expectations. I don't think we need to lower the I think the regulations are appropriate. It's more the expectations that when looking at a Class 2A device, maybe lower risk, or Class 1 devices, there's just too high expectations on that regulatory expectancy, rather than it is just a plaster. Yes, it is sterile, but we have all the controls in place, but we don't need to treat it like it's an implant.
Yeah, I see. I agree with you, and that's great conclusion of our episode. And what I was going to say is probably it is true that in the UK we have a lot more flexible approach, and I have to say I'm quite pleased with our regulators for looking into this and trying to create some flexibilities for companies, and even now thinking of recognition procedures and so on for the CE marking. As you know, this is the latest thing. But in terms of the European Union, I think they need to think a bit more of being competitive and try to not make it so hard for everyone to get into the market, because if people see that they'll have to invest a lot of money to get a CE marking, they might think, well, I can go to the US because it will be a lot easier for me and I'll have a lot quicker access to the market. I don't need to go through all the hurdles with the healthcare systems and so on in Europe.
Absolutely.
So definitely we need to be a bit more competitive. And in my wish list personally is I really hope that the regulators don't create regulations to make our life easier. We don't need more of it to make it easier. It's just keep the ones that you have, put them down, some of them that you don't want, consolidate them, but don't make new ones to make our life easier. It's just, it doesn't work that way.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you everyone for listening.